There's a very, very, very distinct difference between value and success. I'll use my sports reference if I may. You can be a plug and play quarterback in a system like the University of Alabama for the 15 years Nick Saban was there. And it's not that you're not a phenomenal player. A lot of phenomenal quarterbacks go through there. But when the other 21s are all 5-star, just because you go and win the national championship doesn't necessarily mean that that was you. Versus somebody who maybe, Zan, went into a space where their job was to clean up the mess and have to lay the system down, create the policy and procedure, close the gap, identify where they need to go, find the high performer, isolate the low performer. There's so many different things you have to do that can be a challenge. So I really preach and harp on the focusing on value for oneself, and I really lean into the individual because I think giving them value allows them to be able to take that skill and use it wherever they go.
All right, well, BJ, thank you first of all for being here today. Very much looking forward to this conversation. It'd be incredible if we could start off you have a very unique background, and I would love to hear just a little bit about your story and how you got to this place today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, Van, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I love what you guys do. I love your mission, and I appreciate your interest in this particular sector and myself. So thank you for having me. I am originally kind of in my first life, coming out of college, had the pleasure of participating in professional athletics, specifically with the National Football League, getting drafted in 2012 to the Green Bay Packers, and had a great journey from the Packers. Was there about 18 months. Once I got cut from there, had the privilege of getting picked up and playing arena ball in Phoenix for the Arizona Rattlers, and then finally kind of settling in 2016 with my last attempt to play the children's game, if you will, in Canada with the Saskatchewan Rough Riders, and that was a treat just in and of itself, being in a different country, understanding the dynamic of a team in a very diverse setting where maybe football wasn't the number one sport in that particular country. So had the privilege of along the way playing the quarterback position and really being able to lead, build, and create teams that are hardwired really for long-term success. So a lot of ups, a lot of downs, opportunities to really grow in the leadership sector. After 2016 was complete, really didn't know what I was going to do next. Made my way back to Tennessee, where I'm from, specifically Chattanooga, and started kind of reaching out to some of my connections and used my network, both from my high school days, which was Macaulay School in Chattanooga, very well-known boys prep school around the nation. Very, very competitive, both academically and athletically, and then reached out to some local connections and was able to land an opportunity with a bank, BB&T. Now has since sold out, I believe, to Marsh Insurance Services, and had the privilege of kind of getting my feet wet in the private sector, in the working world, and really kind of start making that transition. From there, I had the privilege of learning how to, I call it that my hello stage, of where I was learning how to say hello, not as a professional athlete, which is kind of the stories everybody wanted a lot, right? So they wanted to know, what was it like to sit next to Aaron Rodgers, or what was it like to run out on Lambeau Field, or run out of the tee in Neyland, and really trying to put that aside so that I could recreate, who I was and what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. And through that 18-month experience, one of my requirements or criteria were to leave home again, and really kind of try to reinvent self in a market where I wasn't kind of that household name like I was in my hometown. And through that, I had the privilege of meeting a company at the time that was really thriving, which was Acadia Healthcare. And Acadia Healthcare is based in Franklin, Tennessee. One of their executives, Brent Turner, was a alumnus of my high school, Macaulay School, and we got connected. And for about 6 months, he mentored me on kind of the ways beyond the game, and finally kind of invited me in to participate in the space as an operator. And that was July of 2018. and they sent me down to train in Atlanta, and then had the privilege from Atlanta going to 7 different locations myself over the last about 6.5, almost 7 years, and then had the privilege of most recently being able to be like a group operator over a multi-site type of setting, which was really neat. So, kind of in a nutshell, Zan, there that it's been a heck of a journey. It's really been neat to see the evolution of the space itself, but also kind of a leader who was in one space and that pivoted into another space to see kind of the parallels and synergies on how to lead teams. So that's my story.
Thank you for that. And, we're going to talk about some of the leadership stuff here in a bit. But one thing that I think would be helpful to put into context here is talk about these facilities that you're managing and then running a group of. So help me understand, what does the day-to-day look like? Who are they serving? What are their services offered? Just helping to conceptualize really what that offering is.
So yeah, great question. So, these facilities can run anywhere from, 30 beds to 200 beds, just depending on location, market need, et cetera. So, it can vary. There are two different sides. You have the psychiatric side, which it can be an involuntary facility where, you've got folks that are committed by a psychiatrist or other medical professionals in healthcare to a facility where they are either a harm to themselves or somebody else. That's the psych side, where you are involuntarily committed. And then you have the substance abuse or addiction side. They call that SUD or SUD, substance use disorder. And again, same deal when it comes to capacity and size. Can be anywhere from 30 to 180, 200 beds. And the day to day for both is very similar. You've got, your main focus is your client, the person in need, and the whole entity is really structured around the clinical service. For SUD, that's going to be your therapist and the type of clinical modalities and services that you provide to address depression or to address the trauma focus, or somebody who might be struggling, with anxiety. In the psychiatric function, it's more focused around your nursing and doctor function, which is more medication and getting them regulated so that they can then move on to the next level of care in the continuum, which could be stepped down into a substance use disorder facility or a partial hospitalization setting or a intensive outpatient setting on down the line. So both serve a very important purpose. I would say that the day to day is extremely stressful, especially for our staff, and I think that that's probably, Zan, and this is something, as we get into this, if you want to go down this rabbit hole, I think it's very, very critical and very, very important. It's the single greatest threat, I think, to our industry today, and that's subject to change, but burnout. Our staff and employees that get into this space, it's a calling. That it chose them, they didn't choose it, type of thing. But what we have found is that the need is so great, and the ability to make sure that you are balancing the operational and financial function with the clinical function. There's a lot of push and pull, and it's very long hours, and not to mention just the physical hours, the work they are doing getting unloaded on, by their clients, typically a caseload of 8, 10, sometimes upwards of 12 to 14 clients in some states that don't regulate caseload. There are times where just a certain therapist clicks with somebody, and that call to duty, they go above and beyond, but they're taking a lot of these clients' problems and issues on themselves, and it's very stressful and very strainful. It's very straining for our workforce, and we are seeing an immense amount of burnout. Folks get out of the space. Folks come into the space that have never ever, even really, thought about getting into the space from a multitude of different, points of view. But it is very, it's concerning to see what we are experiencing in those inside those residential settings, because those staff members are really they take on a lot. They take on a lot, and it's very hard not to bring that home. So it's a very intensive position and role, and those guys are heroes for doing it. But that doesn't mean that a hero doesn't feel and can feel some of that own stress and anxiety from it as well. Day to day, I'll just to kind of give you, I'll talk to both sides. So first, the psychiatric side. In both settings, you're going to have schedules where there's daily schedules. Those are regulated state by state on the number of hours in order to be able to appropriately run one of these facilities and be appropriately reimbursed for those services that are rendered as well. So they have those. They have groups, the clients that they will go to. They have individual sessions that they go to, and then they have sessions where they will sit and talk with a medical provider, whether that be a nurse practitioner or an actual psychiatrist or MD, so that they are able to get those services that they need, but from the folks that have the credentials that make them creditable. So that's important. The ancillary services, I think, is extremely important to note. Things like admissions, your utilization review teams, your teams like risk and compliance. Those teams are extremely important. Your human resources department that is handling this challenge and struggle of burnout. I mean, those are all your teams that wrap around your clinical function to make sure that it is stood up and stable, and that they're there to help put the pieces back together when sometimes they come unraveled. So those folks meet, those senior leaders meet their department heads in each one of those departments. They meet daily. We call that the morning meeting or flash. And that is where really the tone is set in that meeting, where it should be anywhere from 15 to 17 minutes, no longer than 22. And it's a place where the CEO or the operator at hand can come in, get a bunch of information in a very short amount of time, because time is very much of the essence, and you can get caught meeting with these different pockets too much, which is taking them away from the clients, and that's something that can really cause an issue. To your point early, why some work and some don't. The more FaceTime and touches that you get with your folks, your clientele, your patients, the better off the facility is going to run every time. As much as you can get in front of them, and really make them feel as though we expected them to arrive. We are excited that they're here. We understand that it's a low point, but if you keep your feet moving and pushing forward, you will come out this a much stronger person. So, the more that you can be in front of your clients, less time in meetings, the better. So that morning meeting really sets that tone, and we talk about things like where we are in terms of the daily census and how things are going. Is there any issues over the last 24 hours? Where are we at with our risk component, and are we operating safely and within the appropriate guidelines? And then making sure that our clients and subscribers are getting the maximum benefit that their insurance provider is offering them. So that meeting is extremely critical. I've seen places, I can tell you, Zan, that's probably one of my top five, is a poorly run flash meeting or morning meeting is a very, 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 very telltale sign for me on whether or not the actual facility itself is running on all cylinders. That's usually where I start. And then after that, it's about walking the grounds and looking at the cleanliness and making sure that the plant operations is creating an environment for therapeutic healing for those patients that are coming in. So very strenuous. It's a 24/7, 365 adventure for those leadership teams. You're always on call, and you're always kind of available for those folks as need be.
You've mentioned a number of very fascinating parts of this. I mean, it's emphasized to me that not only are you dealing with the clientele, the people that you're working with, these patients who have all kinds of issues that they're bringing to the table. I mean, that's the fundamental principle of why they're there. But on top of that, you're dealing with the staff and the leadership teams, and they're taking on this emotional weight and trying to learn from that and trying to deal with it. And of course, you have high churn. I'm curious, when you're holding these flash meetings and even zooming out a little bit into how you're running the different teams, how do you think about the the metrics that you use to say, hey, we're winning here?
Yeah, great question. So the first place I start with every place I go is that we are we are an organism before we're an organization. And what that means is I've got humans that are coming together as a collective to work and pull as one unit. But that doesn't mean that when they go home that they also don't have personal life going on as well. Some of these folks go home and they're caretakers for their elderly grandmothers or mother and fathers. Some of these folks go home and they have a very toxic household where life still creeps in. And that's one of my most important things is to get to know each one of my senior leaders on an individual basis to ensure that I can identify when they are starting to hit their limit or when they can be pushed a little further, and finding that balance. So that's very, very, very important. Number one. As far as the overall KPI and metrics that I use five. There's five main categories, and then you've got subcategories, of course, Zan, inside of these. But I would say that the first thing that you want to look at when you are looking at the business side, I want to make sure that that is very clear. You've got to have a financial and operational component to this so that the business itself does not die on the vine. You want to make sure that you're able to continue to provide the services to as many folks as you can, which requires you to stay financially healthy and operationally healthy as well. So the first one would be revenue growth. So obviously, there's a couple different ways to dissect that. You've got rate, and then you've got volume. So you can have more folks, which equals more revenue, or you can have a higher rate, which means you can have less folks and the same, if not more, revenue. So there's a lot of different ways to look at revenue growth in order to keep the business side of it healthy. Obviously, there's expense management. That's number two. So making sure that you're being good fiduciaries of your time and your money. That's really, really important when you're looking at these facilities, because it's very easy to make decisions subjectively and based off of feel in a very chaotic or pressure packed situation. So it's very important that you have a system and process for managing your expenses appropriately. It's not about being too lean or being too thick on the expense side, but finding that balance for that particular facility is critical. Otherwise, you can get yourself upside down, and then you have to do a number of different operational maneuvers in order to get the business function back in line. The next I would say is risk and compliance. Very, very important piece. Most of these facilities are regulated and managed by a governing body, as well as either Joint Commission accredited or CARF accredited. So these are two entities in and of themselves that are kind of that governing body over the facilities that will come in and do what they call triennial surveys. And there's a list of their own KPIs that they expect for you to do and have in order to run a very safe and efficient shop. So risk and compliance, we have what they call PI all the time, which is process improvement. We do that at least once a month. Some folks do it every other week. They pick a time after morning meeting to continue to drill down and how they can continuously get better. Can be a little bit much to do it that way, just because there's so much going on in the facilities that can take away from just being able to focus on the blocking and tackling fundamentals. But all in all, risk and compliance would be number three. Number four is person served. So very, very, very much focused on what our clients are saying about us, what our families are saying about how we are treating their loved ones. Some of that has merit, as you know, Zan, and some of it doesn't, because a lot of times, you're going to have folks at their lowest point, and in order for them to get well, you have to put them in an uncomfortable state, which requires structure and discipline. And oftentimes, some of these folks coming in have never really had to face that tough structure or discipline type setting, and they can get very perturbed. Sometimes they can leave treatment early, and oftentimes you can have some negative feedback. So you've got to be able to understand where you are and what kind of feedback you're getting for the context you're getting it in. And I would say that we look very hard at what our clientele are saying, especially the ones that are completing treatment and the ones that are able to really give us, hey, we put our time in, we were here to get well, we really want this, we want to be sober, we want to be able to get back out and reinsert ourselves back into society as a hardworking member. And those folks give us a lot of really good things, and it's not always great. It's, hey, could we would like better food or more one-on-one time with the therapist, or can we see a doctor more? And you try to accommodate those things. Certain things you just can't, and certain things that the business function just won't allow. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, the single greatest threat is burnout. Recruiting and then retaining that top talent is my fifth KPI on, hey, are we doing well or not? Right? Are we really putting ourselves in position to attract some of the best talent out there? And then what are we doing to keep them? So all five of those things, in some way, shape, or form, are brought into the morning meeting. That trickles down into what you do weekly, and then finally, when you're recapping your months, you want to see how well you do. And we track all those things, like I say, in subcategories so that we can add that data piece to this. So that ultimately data is not the only thing you use. You have a gut feeling, and you just want to be able to make better informed decisions, and data can often point you in the right direction.
When you think about the people that are coming, the patients that you're working with, do what percentage of those people really have a choice between many different options? And when they do have a choice, why do they choose some of the ones you guys are working at? Like, what do you guys have control over in terms of making sure that it's an appealing option?
Great question. Great question. I would say that there's couple different ways. I would say, obviously, through word of mouth and organic, growth from hey, the better you do treating your clients and the feedback that you're getting from the persons served always is the number one promoter and marketing tool. That's not always really the only driver. You've got digital platforms that allow you to let folks know nationally, locally, we're here to help. This is the type of services we provide. We may or may not be a great fit for you, but give us a call. And if it doesn't work, we can help place you with a partner of ours, with even a competitor, might be a better fit based off of a certain clientele, that would be a much better fit than bringing them into a milieu that is already maybe stable and breaking that whole harmony up, if you will. So you've got the digital side, and then what we call then we have marketing components, which we call boots on the ground, where you actually have physical human beings that are strategically placed in certain markets, or regions, if you will, that would be able to go out and share our story and tell them what we do, why we do what we do, and the type of services that we provide. And at the end of the day, it becomes relation. It's a very relationship based business where when you do good work and you build a solid reputation, and the outcomes from the patients coming to you are favorable, people naturally want to send you their loved one or send you their patients, and that's them putting their name with whomever family chose or reached out to them. That's them putting their name on that by sending them to either one of our facilities or any of the facilities that are out there, which there are. It is so plentiful now, Zan. It's a very competitive landscape across all markets at this point, but it is there are definitely some that do it better than others, and those are pretty, they're pretty, it's pretty clear, that separation of who does it well and who doesn't. And it doesn't mean that somebody's bad for that. It just maybe the formula's not working and your outcomes aren't where they at, and they've got to tweak those first before you're willing to put somebody that you care about or your name on that in there. So you see a variety of different ways of being able to spread the word that the service is here. Here's what we offer. Let us know if we can help.
Absolutely. There's a lot of statistics out there, so it's hard to quote one. But one thing that seems clear to me is that there's a lot more people out there that have addiction that need treatment than there are people who are seeking treatment and are being treated. And coupling that with, and I don't know if this is your experience, I've talked to a number of people who are running companies and facilities who aren't filling up the beds. They have excess room to be able to bring in more people. And so I'm wondering if you could speak to that gap. Why do you think that is?
The whole and this is something I learned along my travels once I got in transition from the psych side to the addiction side was is that your addiction, when you're an addict or you're an alcoholic, its number one objective is to protect itself. It's to protect that disease, and it tricks your mind into believing your own perception, and these folks that are trying to help me are really not trying to help me, and you don't want to do that. Just take another drink or take another hit. And I think there is a multitude of ways to attract business and really put yourself in a position to have a very healthy and quality product. But I don't think it really, if you focus on just filling up beds, then we've really kind of missed the plot here.
Mhm.
I think the focus, and I don't want to speak out of both sides of my mouth. So let's make sure we get this, Zan. The 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 business function alone does require an appropriate amount of revenue in order to keep the machine moving. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. I don't think that's any secret. But if you're focusing on being able to maximize those subscribers' opportunities and benefits while in treatment. And what I mean by that is really doing a good job of digging into what that trauma is, digging into where, what's the reason for your drinking. You see so much now, Zan, the cookie cutter alcoholic or addict, it really just it doesn't exist anymore with all the underlying issues that is, maybe you use because you had a traumatic experience at 13 and you haven't even taken the time to unpack that yet. And when you start seeing all these co-occurring issues, it really gives the therapist an opportunity to really dive deep into some of these patients and really document appropriately what's going on, and really fighting for these folks to get more time in treatment. And a lot of times that can help you when it comes to having to create a good product or worry about bed capacity or bed occupancy. That stuff is very much a real tactic. But when it comes to beds not being filled, you can also there's a multitude of things that you can do at the front door. Maybe you need to change a service line. Maybe you need to change the way in which you are providing that service line. Maybe it's not the service line itself. Maybe you don't have the right operator or the right therapist or the right group times, or whatever the case may be. You really have to dig into that. Typically, it's a fixable gap, though. I want to make that clear. I've had the privilege, like I said, of being at 7. For somebody like me that goes into a lower performing asset, it's not because it's doing well. So I've had the privilege of watching, going into a place with 40 beds and only having 5 patients, and then in 11 months there's 35 patients. Well, that doesn't just happen, by coincidence. There's strategies that go into that so that you can really help grow and hardwire. That's what I was talking about earlier. Hardwire these different facilities for long-term success, where you take a BJ or you take a key senior leader that gets another promotion or a job somewhere else. It doesn't revolve around one human. It's about the system at large. It's the franchise component where you can plug that next, HR director, or that next clinical director, or that next UR director. You can plug that in, and they can just continue to keep that train moving. So there's so many different ways to look at occupancy and how folks are filling up their beds. But the number one way to do that is provide good care, build a quality team that communicates extremely well interpersonally. I think that's really, really important. It's very, very easy to point fingers in this business, and I really try to foster an environment where disagreements aren't risky and we raise our hands. We're about hand raisers, owning owning our craft, trying to perfect our trade, and really being able to communicate to where we're efficient, we're clear, and we're concise, so that we are able to execute and move as one. And it is very difficult to do. Um, but it is something that once it's done, like you know when that unit is moving as one, and it's amazing how you see a facility's occupancy start to increase pretty quickly, Zan. It doesn't have to be a long drawn out 18 to 24-month process to fill up a facility. But again, the goal can't be yelling at a number. I used to say that all the time. Don't yell at a census number. Well, we want 70 and we're only at 50. Well, stop yelling at it. You need to go in and you need to look at strategies in order to produce, better teams, better cohesiveness, better clinical structure, better talent. How do you keep your talent? You keep turning over people. No wonder the clients know more about your institution than you do, because they're hearing a very disgruntled employee on the way out the door say this place is a mess. Well, how do you think that does, with somebody who's there, who's already, in a very difficult spot, maybe messy, spot themselves, and then they hear that this place doesn't know what they're doing. Oh man, that's a kiss of death. That really puts you in a tough spot. So it's about building the right dynamic, from a leadership team, and then watching that trickle down.
Absolutely. It sounds like it's really a holistic approach. Everything from operations to the services provided to the awareness and how the word gets out, and managing the reputation of the place as well. One thing that I've picked up from this conversation and past conversations is that a core to this and is really discipline and how you lead a team. So maybe you can speak to what do you think is really unique about how you need to lead a team in this industry, and how you've had success in it.
Oh man, I love that question. So as an operator, you're only as good as your team, period. And I'm very much about humility and civility. But as a leader, and this is critical, Zan. This I tell a lot of the CEOs that I help mentor and support along the way is that your job, if you're doing it right, is very lonely. It's very unpopular. There's a lot of sacrifice in it, and oftentimes you're not liked. Like it's not about you trying to collect like buttons or clicks. Operators who are the best at what they do, and that doesn't mean that you can be somebody who's rude or pompous, or somebody who is always disgruntled or looks like, I'm here not to be liked. That's not what I'm saying, and I don't think that's the way people would interpret that. But what I am saying is you have to be able to make the unpopular decision for the greater good. It is always about removing self, controlling what you can control, and attach your story to something bigger than who you are. And I call that the servant's heart game plan. And being able to lead from the front, and make sure that your teams understand that. The other thing you said, I think, is extremely important to mention, is that there's a very, very, very distinct difference between value and success. Very, very different. What I mean by that is you can be, I'll use my sports reference if I may, you can be a plug and play quarterback in a system like the University of Alabama for the 15 years Nick Saban was there. And it's not that you're not a phenomenal player. A lot of phenomenal quarterbacks go through there. But when the other 21 folks, the 11 on defense and then the other 10 on offense, include, then you add yourself in for a total of 22. When the other 21s are all 5-star, just because you go and win the national championship doesn't necessarily mean that was you, right? Versus somebody who maybe, Zan, went into a space where their job was to clean up the mess and have to lay the system down, create the policy and procedure, close the gap, identify where they need to go, find the high performer, isolate the low performer. There's so many different things you have to do, in many different ways, where that can be a challenge. So I really preach and harp on the focusing on value for oneself, and I really lean into the individual, because I think giving them value allows them to be able to take that skill and use it wherever they go, versus just focusing on hitting this number or hitting this particular KPI. I think that we lose the plot there, Zan, when we're trying to focus on just the KPI. Focus on value. Don't be afraid to get in an uncomfortable state, because that's how you grow, and then be able to apply those lessons that you learn in those states, or from those scars that you get. That's going to help you down the road. So really, really, there's a big difference for me in how I approach success and what I believe to be value, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had one interesting follow-up from what you were just talking about, which I mean, I saw an article, or actually, I think it was a video of you speaking before, and you talked about how important it is for a leader to have an element of being nice, and that's something that's very much overlooked. Is it talk a little bit about how you've seen that as an important part of a leadership skill, and maybe how sometimes it's overlooked?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you don't mind, then only to make sure that I'm articulating, there's a difference between nice and kind.
Mhm.
And you're gonna make fun of my example, but somebody who is nice will look at you when you smile with a piece of lettuce in your teeth and be like, "Oh, you look great, no big deal," just so that you did not have to create any kind of conflict type situation. Somebody who's kind will pull you aside and say, "Hey, listen, you got a piece of lettuce in your teeth, go ahead and pull that out," and they're not afraid
Right.
to say what needs to be said in a very humble and civil approach and tone. So being kind goes a long, long way, Zan, and real love and real kindness might not look like or feel like what it is you're expecting. That's the nice side where everybody's just trying to keep the peace and how do you make me feel? That's not what I'm referring to here. Somebody who is kind and caring will tell you what you need to hear, not necessarily what you want to hear all the time. And that might be a very harsh reality at certain points of time and in certain contexts. Because again, like I said, if we go back to we're organisms before we're an organization, there could be stuff going on outside of the organization that we don't even know about as operators or leaders that can lead to a breakdown or an emotional state. And when you deliver that news, it might not be received in the way that you were hoping it might get received, which is also why it's important to build those relationships with your individuals. Let them know, hey, I actually do care. There's an appropriate line and boundary for that, of course, but there is a state in which you have to invest in your humans. What do they like to do? What are their hobbies? Do they have kids? Do their kids play sports? What flavor of gum do they like? Just something that shows that there is a true investment in the human growth versus just the human being used as a means to an end. Real kindness requires honesty, and the ability to deliver real news, which could sometimes be that unpopular state for folks to grow, and that's very difficult. That's very difficult in any industry, that we have in this day and age. But because it cannot be about how you necessarily worrying about hurting somebody's feelings. The ultimate goal is to get the unit to move as one so that we can provide the best possible care or service to our subscribers and clients. And for me, that is my staff. As an administrator or as a senior leadership team, your job necessarily isn't the client at large, it's the people who take care of the people. So focusing on an environment where you're taking care of your humans that take care of the humans, the beneficiary ends up being the clients anyway. And you will be amazed at how much you can reduce turnover, increase retention, see those person served outcomes become more favorable, all by focusing in strategically on being kind. And being kind doesn't mean always being nice.
It's a very helpful distinction, and you articulated it very well. For my last question, maybe a quicker one, I wanted to ask you. There may be a lot of executives out there who are running behavioral health clinics who are listening to this. What's a message from somebody who's had success here that something to pay attention to, something to highlight that maybe peer to peer would be of helpful to hear when you first started?
Don't be afraid to fail and get up and fail faster. I think so many people get so focused on climbing the ladder, making sure they don't make a mistake, making sure that they position themselves appropriately and hitch their wagon appropriately to the right convoy, if you will, or individual human. And that's all well and good. I'm not telling you not to read the situation as you see it at large right in front of you, but make sure that you are not afraid. This goes back to my value point, Zan, where if you're willing to go out and obtain some of those scars, those end up becoming your spoils or your trophies in the long run, because you're now in a place where you can be self-sufficient and self-sustainable. Not that you don't need a team or want a team, but your value to that team now is so much greater, because you now know, well, if I step here, then I know for a fact that I'm gonna get bit. Or if I step here, I know that what this is gonna do for this dynamic, even though they can't see it. I'm at a more 30,000 foot view, and I know that this is going to bring this around in three more months or 90 days. So we now know what that feels like. So many folks want to be so perfect. I call it the Floyd Mayweather effect. I'm a big fan, but 52-0 is not real when you are in an operator type role, or in a role where you are a leader. You are going to get bloody. You're going to get your hands dirty. You're going to fall. You're going to get fired. You're going to get relocated. I've been all those things, and don't be afraid to do that. And that's a lot easier to say than do. So make sure you're focused on fail, get up, fail faster. And I would say that the other side of that, Zan, that's really, really important, is find you somebody that you can have this conversation with. Hey, I might have done a little too much of this and gotten myself, overextended, meaning like a mentor or a coach, or, so many of those words get so overused, Zan. So I apologize. I don't have the appropriate nomenclature, but I would say find somebody you can bounce some ideas off of, to where you know that you're in the right space, or where they can gut check you and say, yeah, I understand the whole fail, get up, fail faster thing here, Beej, but at the end of the day, I think you're pushing that a little too far. And they can help keep you in check, but don't be afraid to venture out and see how this thing really works, because it's easy to fall into a system, get successful early, and then when you try to make either a lateral or level up move, you don't have the tools to be able to lead appropriately or scale appropriately the job that you've just been put in. And now you've put yourself at real risk, as well as all those other humans that you're now moving around, and you don't know what you're doing. And there's operators out there today doing those very things.
Powerful words. So thank you, BJ. I really appreciate this conversation. And I hope that as things continue for you, there'll be other opportunities for us to have a conversation again.
Zan, thank you so much. Appreciate you having me on.